now then.
Thank you, and can I welcome you all to this virtual Cabinet meeting for the 11th of February 2021, and it's nice to actually see all of you. I would just like to go through some general housekeeping before we start. Present at the meeting are members of the Cabinet and a number of council officers. If they need to speak or if they're called in to speak, they will say who they are at that time. And can I remind everyone present to turn their mobile phones to silent? There's nothing worse than vibrating phones blaring over someone who is talking. I'd also refer you to the published protocols for holding virtual meetings at Harrow Council, noting the following. Good Cabinet members keep their videos on at all times, but put microphones on mute unless speaking. Other members and participants should switch off their videos and put microphones on mute until they are invited to speak in the meeting. If you would like to speak, then please indicate using the hand function and I will call you in. Please no over talking because it's difficult to hear what people are saying. In case of a technical problem, a meeting will adjourn until the issue is resolved. If the technical problem persists and the meeting is incorrect, the meeting will be adjourned and rearranged for a later date. If I have a technical problem and I cannot rejoin, then Councillor Ferry as Deputy Leader will take over as Chair of the meeting. Can you please note as well that the meeting is being video and audio recorded and will be available on the Council website. So that's the general housekeeping. I'm still recovering from COVID and at times still have shortness of breath, and to the pleasure of others I sometimes lose my voice. If this is to happen this evening, then I will hand over the chair of the meeting to Councillor Keith Ferry as Deputy Leader. And finally, whilst the vaccination rollout is going very well in Harrow, I will remind you that we are still within a pandemic with the country under national lockdown restrictions. Despite recent reductions to the infection rates, COVID-19 continues to be extremely high in London, and as you will see from the reports tonight, the rate in Harrow is still higher than last November when we were moved to a higher tier. From calls with the NHS today, there's also considerable pressure on the NHS, and the ICUs in hospitals are still at surge capacity and many residents are still on ventilators. I therefore propose that item 8, which is the COVID-19 update, be moved up the agenda and heard after item 3. Is that agreed? I see, people are nodding in the affirmative, so I'd say that's a yes. So if we move to item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. I haven't received any. I'm just checking. I see everyone's expected is here, so I haven't received any apologies of absence. So declarations of interest. The declarations of interest by members of Cabinet have been published on the Council's website. Can Cabinet please note that Councillor Varsha has declared a disclosable pecuniary interest in items 4 and 5 on the agenda, public and councillor questions respectively, in that her husband works for London Underground. She has a dispensation, will remain in the virtual meeting for the duration of these items. Can I have any declarations from other members present in the virtual meeting, please? Paul, I see your hand up.
Yeah, 2 things. One, if Wallboat car park comes up, I have a pecuniary interest in that. I also am Chairman of Lee Valley Park Authority, which is a levying authority, and therefore have a non-pecuniary interest in the budget.
Noted. Thank you, Paul. Just when we get to the questions, I've been advised that Councillor Rich-Dolman has indicated there's a non-pecuniary interest in relation to question 7 on the councillor questions, in that he is chairman of the parish council at St Luke's Catholic Church, Pinner, and that's a non-pecuniary interest. Can I ask that if you become aware of an interest during the meeting, please indicate and we will record it at that time. Thank you. And that now moves us on to item 3, which is petitions. In accordance with the Constitution, all petitioners have 1 minute to read out the terms of petitions. So are there any petitions from Cabinet members? Yes, no. Are there any petitions from councillors present in the virtual meeting? Stephen, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Leader. And may I say how pleased I am to see you back, and I hope you're feeling better, and that you recover well soon. This is a petition of 63 signatures about vehicle crossings in Hutton Lane, and the verges in this road are owned by housing. So this is a request for them to allow vehicle crossovers across this land to help relieve the severe parking problems in Hutton Lane. And unfortunately, housing refusing to do so, hence this petition. So the petition is requesting Harrow Council Housing Department to review existing policy which does not allow construction of vehicle crossings on green verge land. Parking is a major issue on Hutton Lane, and allowing construction of vehicle crossovers to individual properties, especially those facing the green, will allow residents to safely park their vehicles and close to their property. Highways will not currently accept applications of new vehicle crossovers due to the current housing policy. My application for a vehicle crossover for 31 Hutton Lane was rejected on this basis of land ownership and policy. I hope that in signing this petition, a review of the policy will be made. Highways will be given permission to pursue my application further, but also allow my neighbours to pursue their own individual application for a vehicle crossing should they wish to do so on this change.
Thank you very much, Steve. Now that be referred to Paul Walker's team. Have you sent it through to Democratic Services?
I have, yes.
Thank you. Are there any other petitions to be presented tonight? No. So if we now move on to item number 8, which is the COVID-19 update, I would like to invite Sean Harris as the Chief Executive Officer to present this item. Whilst it is being loaded up to screens, this presentation is available on the council website within the third supplemental pack. So over to you, Sean.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Cabinet, and hopefully this will be a useful update for the Cabinet and members generally and members of the public about where we are in relation to the coronavirus pandemic. I will run through things relatively quickly and hopefully that will leave any time for any questions that anybody has. So in terms of the strategic update, going to cover where we are in terms of the pandemic overall, what's happened in relation to lockdown, where we are in respect of the council's and borough's response, to provide an update in relation to the vaccination, and to give an overall context of the position going forward. I think what I would want to do to characterise for the Cabinet and for the meeting is to say that there are a number of more positive things to report in this particular update, but as Councillor Henson said, we have still got many challenges ahead, but at least there is the prospect of light at the end of the tunnel, even if the tunnel remains quite long and there are a number of challenges getting to the end. But hopefully people will see that there is some positive progress in a number of areas. Just in terms of the actual figures, as people will be aware, the lockdown has now been in place for over 5 weeks, and that has had a significant impact on overall case numbers. I can give an update that actually, as of today, Harrow is now at 230 cases per 100,000 people, whereas at the peak of the pandemic a few weeks ago, Harrow was almost at 1,000 cases per 100,000 people. So that is a significant reduction. The measures are working and there is a suppression of virus in the community. But as Councillor Henson mentioned, we are still at a higher level than we were when we went into the second lockdown, and there is still some way to go to get case levels to where the expectation would be after a lockdown period, and certainly I'm sure the ambition will be to get case levels well below 100. Similarly, and I was involved as Councillor Henson was with meetings with the NHS today, the situation is improving in the NHS. There is less pressure on our local hospital, but there are still significant numbers of people who are in intensive care, and as we have seen over the last few weeks, sadly, a significant number of people in Harrow have died as a result of coronavirus. So the situation is getting better, but there is still some way to go and a number of challenges. Also on the positive front, the vaccination programme is progressing well, and clearly that is one of the elements of the response to coronavirus that will mean that we are in a position to deal with the pandemic. And I'll give a little bit more detailed update about that later on in the presentation. This is the chart that's produced by Carol, the Director of Public Health, which summarises where we are in terms of overall case levels. Also, importantly, because of risk factors, the case levels for residents aged over 60, which have fallen below 200, and also how we're doing in terms of testing, track and trace, and positivity levels. So positivity levels were over 25 not too long ago, and now they are just over 11. And the expectation is that we'd want to see positivity levels well below 7 before we would expect to see the pandemic under control. But as you can see from the graphs, that there is steady and quite sharp progress in terms of a reduction as a result of lockdown, but there is still some way to go to get us back to where we were in the autumn. In terms of the overall position, we know that the lockdown will last in its current form until early March, with an expectation that significant restrictions will continue well into the spring. We also know that the government will produce a lockdown roadmap on the 22nd of February, which will set out the phases and the progress that's likely to take place in terms of lifting lockdown restrictions, etc., with the main focus in the first phase of possible changes to the full reopening of schools from the 8th of March. So that will be an important decision, both in terms of what that means for the local community, what it means for the economy, what it means for parents, etc., and also what the likely expectation is about the progression of the tackling the pandemic and the restrictions relating to that, which will probably see us move from where we are now to a tiered system over the spring and into early summer. I think it's important that also that we know that there is expectation of significant council-related activity relating to COVID-19, both in terms of the emergency and subsequent recovery for all of 2021, and that's part of the planning assumptions that the council and its partners are currently working on. And of course, this is all subject to many factors which are variable: vaccine rollout, case reductions, and in particular, any impacts on new variants. There are a number of places in London that are undertaking surge testing at the moment because of the identification of new variants, and that's something that the council has a contingency plan for should that be a requirement for us in Harrow at any point in the next few weeks and months. The next two slides are very similar to what I shared at the January Cabinet meeting, which explains at a high level the sorts of activity that the council has been undertaking in relation to enforcement of the regulations, of rolling out lateral flow testing. And as always, I want to use this as an opportunity to promote the availability of lateral flow testing in Harrow. The website identified is on the slides at harrow.gov.uk/test. There's plenty of availability of lateral flow testing, and it's particularly important for people who are key workers to be regularly tested because many people are asymptomatic, and this is a way of identifying that. So that's an important part of our response, as is the engagement with communities around both enforcement regulations and testing and also vaccination. And this slide picks up the work that we've done, particularly with the NHS in supporting hospital discharge, the work that we've done working very closely with our schools to ensure that children of key workers and vulnerable children continue to have access to school. We've been administering a wide range of business support grants in relation to the lockdown, and key involvement in supporting the NHS in the rollout of the vaccination centres, all on top of the work that we're obviously doing to continue the delivery of universal, targeted and specialist council services during a challenging period of pandemic, with the vast majority of council staff working at home. And as I always do, I just want to use the opportunity to thank the council staff working across all of our disciplines for the ongoing very significant focus and dedication to continue to provide a wide range of services during what is a particularly challenging period of lockdown and pandemic. Just in terms of one of the key developments that I've been reporting on at the last few cabinet meetings is progress in relation to the rollout of vaccination. It has been delivered very effectively in Harrow. Great work by the primary care networks of GPs at their sites, the Hive, Byron Hall and Tithe Farm, and there is possibility of further satellite sites going forward, and also delivery through a small number of pharmacies. Pleased to say that in Harrow the vaccine rollout is on course to hit the priority 1 to 4 cohorts by the 15th of February. And that has gone very well. And I'm going to pick up some more detailed figures on my next slide. There are challenges, and there are some care homes that have had outbreaks, and it's not possible to vaccinate in the aftermath of an outbreak. There is a big challenge in making sure that we can meet the many thousand social care staff, many of whom are working in the community. There is vaccine hesitancy amongst some of our Black and minority ethnic communities, particularly of communities of Black heritage and also of Pakistani heritage. And we also know from the figures that there's also vaccine hesitancy amongst our most deprived residents. So there's a lot of focus through our work with the community and via our work with the Community Champions Fund to make sure that we target groups, cohorts, and particularly the social care workforce who may be more vaccine hesitant. The next phase, which we expect formal announcements on within the next few days, is to roll out to the next cohorts, which is all the over 50s and the clinically extremely vulnerable and carers. And we expect to see a timetable that will go down those cohorts between March and probably the end of April and May. And we understand that as part of this wider rollout, the master vaccination site, which is also at Byron Hall, will likely to go live sometime in early or middle of March. Just in terms of a little bit more detail, some figures hot off the press today. Overall, Harrow has the highest vaccination take-up in North West London, and actually one of the highest vaccine take-up in the whole of London. You'll see from here that, for example, 86% of the over 80s have been vaccinated, 90% of the 75 to 79s, and 88% of the 70 to 74-year-olds, which is really good. And there's still work going on this week to try and drive those numbers up, both before and after the weekend. See also that a little bit more of a challenge about getting people who are clinically extremely vulnerable vaccinated. Many people in those categories have been shielding and have been at home for a long time and quite understandably reluctant to come out of vaccination, but there's further work going on there. And as you can also see, although that the care home resident vaccination figures are very good, there's some real challenges around vaccinating care home staff, but also particularly social care staff in the community. Lots of activity to work on that, because they are a particularly challenging workforce to engage, and also to make sure that we have the right ability for people to get out and be vaccinated through various centres. So very good work overall, very good achievement, really important in terms of dealing with the pandemic and being positive. But there are some areas where we need to continue to focus, and we've been working very closely to support NHS colleagues in all these areas. Just a couple of slides just before I draw to the close, Chair. In the short term, significant number of impacts continue in relation to COVID-19, obviously in the community, but in terms of the council, significant demands on a number of services: adult social care, children's services, enforcement, schools, business grants, etc. Many new services set up to respond to COVID, and they're listed there. And also, we are almost 12 months into our COVID response. We're in the third lockdown, significant pressures around staff many of whom have been working at home for this period of time, and we need to make sure that we continue to be really focused on staff resilience and capacity, as that is a big challenge for us. And obviously we are going to see a series of changes to lockdown over the next few months, much of which of course will be very welcome, but that will see a very busy spring for most services. And as the Cabinet and members will be aware, the mayoral and GLA elections are going ahead in May, and that will cause a challenge for the council in terms of making sure we have the capacity to be able to ensure that happens safely and effectively. So a series of short-term impacts that we'll be looking at managing over the next few months, and into the longer term, as I said previously, the whole of 2021 is certainly going to be dominated by our response to COVID. That will see a gradual move through the emergency to a mixture of dealing with the emergency and starting to do recovery, and then being more focused on recovery as we go through the year. Detail of which obviously relates to timings of lifting of restrictions, vaccine rollout, etc. But there are a number of areas, NHS and social care catch-up, the economic challenge that will come in the aftermath of COVID, particularly as things like furlough end. Major focus, quite rightly, on catch-up for children relating to their missed education, and there are going to be ongoing challenges around the impact of hidden harm and mental health. And it's very much going to be the fact that our services will continue to be focused on delivering in this context for some time to come. So hopefully that quick canter through the key elements of both where we are in the pandemic, the likely policy developments over the next few months, and also the council's response on a whole range of different levels has given Cabinet councillors and members of the community who are able to watch the meeting a good sense of where we are in relation to the pandemic. As I said at the beginning, we are beginning to see improvements in a number of areas. There are a number of positives to report on, both in terms of cases and in terms of vaccination. But it's also the case that there's a lot of hard work and a long way to go in our response to the pandemic. But hopefully that gives the Cabinet and the community in general the opportunity to see the work that's going on in the pandemic response. So thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Is there any questions or comments? Simon.
Thank you, Leader. I'd just like to emphasise what Sean was saying about the importance of vaccination. My own experience was really good. It was really straightforward and easy. From the text from the GP surgery down Pinnerview on the Monday evening to being vaccinated at Byron Hall on the Wednesday morning. And in fact, they could have done it on the Tuesday evening. Everything was well planned. I have to say thank you to the NHS colleagues who take their time off from their day job to run the vaccination centre and give the vaccines, and a big shout out to the army of volunteers who are giving their time to work at these centres to make sure everything goes smoothly. And in the main, it was going smoothly. A few hiccups. I was there on the third day it was open, and it was really a good experience. So I must encourage all Harrow residents who get the invitation to have the vaccine to go along and get it. There is really absolutely no need to be apprehensive at all. And just to emphasise what Sean was saying, we are working really closely with our community partners. We recognise that 85 or 88% or 90% is really good figures, but we are determined to find the other 10%, 12%, 14% in areas where, as Sean said, communities have hesitancy. They may need further information. There may be language barriers, which is why some of our colleagues have stepped forward to make foreign language videos in Tamil, in Urdu, in Gujarati, to inform the communities about the safety and necessity of vaccination, and indeed people who simply may not be registered with a GP. We have to find ways of finding them and persuading them to go along. So that work, as Sean has said, is vital, because we need to get as close to 100% as possible to give us all the safeguard of vaccination across our community here in Harrow. Thanks. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Simon. Paul.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to echo what Simon said. I've had so many good reports from people who've had their vaccines at all the different centres, actually. The work of the volunteers has been absolutely amazing, and I think we really need to pay tribute to that, the way they make people who are sometimes a bit apprehensive feel at ease and process them through in a really, really efficient manner. And just to join in and say, if people do get called for the vaccine, my mother did, I took her down to get that. I know a number of our colleagues on the council and our staff have, that we need to get as many people as we can vaccinated, and it is incredibly safe and incredibly necessary for us to return to normal. And I know a number of my colleagues have done videos as well, and indeed some of them are volunteering at the centre, so it's really good that we're doing so well in that, both in Harrow and across the country.
Thank you, Paul. And Christine.
Thank you, Leader. I mean, I obviously want to echo what's already been said, but just going back to what you were saying, Sean, about how very important it is, and I'm so glad you always say it, but how very important it is to notice the very hard work of the council. And your concern, your very appropriate concern for the resilience of people who have been working 7 days a week and who are getting very tired and who have been covering each other's jobs and we will continue to do so. And now on top of this, we have to organise an election. And I'm sure that that must make you, well, you're very resourceful, just like everybody else is working for the council is resourceful, but it's going to need luck, I think, as well as resource, because this is a very big ask. And just to say on behalf of everyone, I'm sure, thank you to everyone for all that they do. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. I'd just like to make a comment because I couldn't make the meeting in January, but I do remember in January 2020, when Sean booked a meeting with me and started saying that we had to start preparing for an emergency situation. So the council put in plans at that time to start building up and not realising how bad the pandemic would be. What I'd have said before on a number of occasions, pardon me, is about how in awe I am of the staff who suddenly stepped up to make sure the services could work. And it was moving from a 5-day operation, where people do 5 days out of 7 to people doing a 7-day operation through the first wave of it all. In the summer, people weren't booking holidays because they were preparing for a second wave to come along. And in November last year, when we started seeing the variant coming through, we saw them sort of, although they'd booked holidays or time off, they were still working and responding to calls and emails. And over Christmas, I think I spoke more to Sean than I did my wife, I think, on the phones and conversations that we had, and Paul as well, actually. But it was New Year's Eve. I think I was speaking to Sean at 9 o'clock on New Year's Eve about the pandemic, when we had hundreds of people testing positive. What I would say is, that's a testament to people who work in the public sector and probably not noticed, where people talk about the NHS all the time and forget about sometimes about all the other organisations that support through the voluntary community and local government services. My concern is, as we come out of lockdown, we're going to start seeing a rise in mental health approaches around mental health, and also around adult social care, but also, like last time, we'll see more approaches around safeguarding. The vaccination, I think, is a testament of how things can work, the speed and pace that it is set up and how it operated, and people have spoken about it. Paul and Simon have spoken about that. To have 12 million people sort of vaccinated in a short space of time shows what happens, when people put their mind to it. But I would remind people that people can still get COVID even though they've been vaccinated. My brother works in a hospital. He had a vaccination in December and he's now off sick with COVID. But what it means is it gives them more chance of staying out of hospital, rather than going in with the urgent care that we've seen. But it's also, as a final part, is around testing. I think there's never been an more important time for testing at this, as now, to make sure that we can sort of bring a control on the virus itself. Now, when Sean talks about the figures of reducing down to 230, I think that's per 100,000. That's still higher than the end of November. And, in that time, we were moving into tier 4 and sort of lockdown processes. So it is important to keep testing to find out where this virus is, to reach out to those communities that are quite nervous about it and talk about the vaccination and alternatives to that. But I will finish by saying, because it is a council meeting, I'll be parochial here, just to thank all the staff, because it has been over a year, and the amount of effort and time people have put in is often not noticed, and it is a testament to their commitment that has allowed the council to get through in a better way than it would have done, if they hadn't brought that, without their support and professionalism. So I'd like to thank you for that. If you could pass that on, Sean, it'd be gratefully appreciated.
Thank you, Chair, and obviously, as always, it's very, very helpful to get the support, and I know that it's across the council for the work that council staff at all levels in all services are doing. So it is most appreciated now, and I'll ensure that as part of my updates to staff that I pass on the thanks of all councillors to staff. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So the report is, as I said, is published within the supplementary pack on the agenda on the website. Can Cabinet note the presentation which is set out as published and the verbal update? Thank you.
Noted. Yeah.
Noted.
We now move to public questions. We've received 6 and we have 15 minutes allowed for this item. In order to maximise the time available and get through as many questions as possible, the published questions will be taken as read, and we will proceed directly to the answer and supplementary question, the way that it was run at the last meeting. So the first question is to Councillor Palmer. Question 1.
Thank you, Chair. So the question is, how can we trust that the consultation outcome will be fulfilled? So the answer is that the consultation will be announced next week. Obviously, we don't know what the result will be and what recommendations will be put to the TARSAC meeting. So we'll just have to wait, but it's an opportunity for all residents to put their views forward and for us to then see what recommendations we can put forward. So do you have a supplemental?
Can I ask who the question was to? Because it wasn't even said who actually was asking the question.
Great, you're not. Yes, so that's you. Is it me, Mayap?
Me, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I say, I've been asking questions for 4 months now, and it's sad that you still not pronounce my name properly, because I've been here literally from the beginning. My supplementary question was, in the last 2 months, we have noticed that you were absent, and each chair would have known this. Why did they not inform the public, and why did you not give us an apology or an explanation for this?
Well, I have made my apologies to the chair, so I have followed the right process.
But why did they not tell us, the public, who've been asking questions to you, who were not available during the last 3 months? And why did the what I said, the chair of each of these meetings not inform the public why you were not available?
That's for them to tell you, not for me. I have followed the process and I gave my apologies to the chair.
Sorry, the question's been answered. It's not for the...
Not really. You haven't answered.
All it needs is apologies have to be submitted. So can we move on to question number 2, please?
I must say you haven't even answered my question that I submitted properly. So I'm very disappointed and I'm not surprised. That's all I can say. Thank you very much.
Can we move on to question number 2? That question number 2 is to myself around the use of closed roads and ANPR cameras and speed cameras. Speeding in residential streets is usually addressed using measures such as traffic calming, 20-mile-an-hour speed restrictions and low traffic neighbourhoods. The police enforce speed limits, dangerous driving and other moving traffic offences. The forthcoming public consultation on low traffic neighbourhoods will seek views on speeding issues and speed limits and any other traffic concerns that people have within the scheme area. So the question was from Karusha Thomas. Is it Karusha, sorry?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Councillor Henson. Okay, I'm going to go ahead with my supplementary question, Councillor Henson. Good evening to everybody. Councillor Henson, the truth about LTNs is that the council, especially in areas that it has densely populated with flats, wants to force people to give up their cars and make journeys more difficult for us by creating traffic bottlenecks in central Harrow, which affects workers like me. Yet you are not making car journeys more difficult in the affluent parts of Harrow, like Pinner and Stanmore, where roads are not closed with plant pots and APNR cameras. So my question, Councillor Henson, is what plans do you have to close roads in Pinner and Stanmore with plant pots and APNR cameras? And if you don't have plans, when is that going to happen? Thank you.
Thank you. The consideration for traffic schemes normally comes through either professional advice from officers because dealing with traffic issues, or more generally through petitions received from residents. A petition was received through the traffic panel from residents of Headstone South, and there's also been other concerns raised with officers about other areas of traffic concern, which has been exacerbated over the past few years with the use of sat-nav, where people are being diverted down narrow and fast roads. So if the residents of those areas were to petition the council and they go through the traffic panel, and if funding was available, then consideration would be given to those areas as well.
Thank you, Councillor Henson, but the consultation that you undertook showed that most people were against these schemes anyway. The first consultation you've published.
The first consultation went out under government guidance, which was online from June right through till September, and they were implemented under the guidance which says the statutory consultation takes place during the operation, 6 months of the operation of the scheme. Normally we'd consult before the scheme goes in, but that wasn't the condition that came through on this occasion.
Thank you, Councillor. I would just like to say that.
So we now move on to question number 3, which is from Margot Dimlick. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. It's about the Headstone Horticultural Society, and we did have this as a question from Councillor Hinckley last year, I think in December, and it's why the council hasn't been in contact with you. I would apologise actually that the Headstone Lane Horticultural Society feel they have been put on hold. Currently the council is speaking with the doctor's surgery, who also wish to remain, but they want to talk to them about their requirements before reassessing the scheme. The doctors, in turn, must seek the consent of the clinical commissioning group, who are requiring them to complete a business plan on the proposal to ensure it can be funded. Given the international pandemic and the pressures this has put on the health service and doctors, they have not been able to progress the matter as quickly as planned. As we went into a national lockdown from mid-December, they haven't had time to do this. So it is still ongoing. And I've been told today that council officers will contact the society to progress this matter. Did you have a supplementary question?
I did, but I just wanted to say that you didn't answer the question that I submitted, which was why was no unbiased third party appointed to assess the matter. That was the question I submitted, but I do have a supplementary one, so maybe you could answer them both at the same time. The second question is, how can the Horticultural Society and community feel like they're being listened to when there's a disconnect between what's being said and what's being done?
Well, they are listened to, but it's more complicated in some sense. The doctor's surgery gave notice that they were moving out, although they now plan to they want to stay. That was what through the CCG, who coordinated the funding for GP surgeries, because that's why they invested in the centre at Belmont. The part around the consultation, the team that would normally do that have been repurposed in some sense through to COVID, which has meant they haven't been able to progress this as it would have been done in a normal situation. There was also at the time, over a year ago, when there was discussions taking place around a relocation to another site, but all that has been paused as well because we don't have capacity within the council to deal with. The officer will be contacting the society to work out what to discuss the progress on this matter and give you better information around what the next steps will be. Thank you. We now move on to question number 4, which is from Luke Wilson, which is a direct question to me really. Can you confirm that portfolio holders should communicate with residents when requested to discuss solutions for council-led schemes? And I would say that portfolio holders, and I'd say actually along with other elected councillors, engage with their constituents at every opportunity. I would say that in many instances, residents may be signposted to reports that have the information, or to current or planned consultations if more appropriate. All views are then considered before a decision is made. So while they might discuss outside of planning, I must say, there's quite big restrictions on planning, but on other things they will discuss with the local community and to try and get consensus about moving forward. Luke, did you have a supplementary question?
Yeah, so firstly, I'd just like to say it's good to see you back, and I hope that you're recovering well. You can hear it in your voice, you're still recovering, but I hope it continues to go well. My supplementary question is for Councillor Varsha Palmer, as the LTN scheme portfolio holder. I'd like to understand, why will you not do your duty and meet with residents to discuss the suggestions for the future of the LTN scheme? Do you not believe in democracy?
I will answer the question. I do know that a number of online meetings have been held, and I do know there's been a significant number of contacts from residents about low traffic neighbourhoods, and I've had a number of come through to me as well, and some I've managed to speak to in person, not that many to be honest, because of other priorities that have come through, but also we've had the number of emails that have come through. It's come through for some different responses, but throughout the low traffic neighbourhoods themselves, there is a statutory consultation that's about to start. So there's going to be a consultation throughout the process that's online, and that's where the portal, that's where the responses come back through. And then there's also the statutory consultation that's now will be taking place soon, that will report back to the traffic panel and who will make a number of recommendations around the schemes themselves. And that is the due process of how we respond to the consultations. I think with the number of people that have been contacting councillors, it's near enough impossible to speak to everyone individually.
Can I just ask why Varsha Palmer did not answer my question?
Because I was answering it. I was answering it because you directed the question to me, so I've answered it. I think Varsha has also responded to a number of people and just given the same information.
Well, she refuses to speak to LTN04 residents.
It goes through local councillors to speak to. On question number 5, I think is it from Heshma Shah, about report from the Transport for All did, and stating in some of the areas where LTNs have been introduced, participants have told us that the streets are very unfriendly. I would say that one of the most popular reasons the council to justify LTNs is that they are to encourage active travel. Given that in Harrow there are many streets that are particularly unfriendly for the general population, that's your question that you come through with. The response.
Yeah, but it was directed to Varsha. She asked if I wanted Varsha to answer the question.
And the question on the application has come through to be addressed to me. So
I actually said to Nicoletta that Varsha to
reduce the amount of vehicular traffic, which is beneficial to people that have disability and less mobile, particularly pedestrians. The forthcoming public consultation on low traffic neighbourhoods will seek views on issues from everyone, including vulnerable groups. I must remind you that with the reduction in grant funding over the past 10 years, the cost of road repairs is balanced around how much we can raise locally, as we do not get anything out of the vehicle excise duty from government or any other source of income to pay for it. Did you have a supplementary question?
I do, but it's actually for Varsha because that's where my original question was directed to. So Varsha, Transport for All conducted a study. 72% of disabled participants criticised how the introduction of LTNs in their local area had been communicated to them. Also led to longer journey times for disabled residents as well as care workers, with travel becoming more exhausting, expensive, complicated or difficult. Given this, please can you tell the public what specific advice the council's disability consultant for TARSAT said about the impact of roadblocks would have on disabled residents, and how did he or she engage with disabled residents of Harrow to find out if the schemes would benefit them before advising you?
I can answer the question on the basis that the equality impact assessment would have been done at the time of the application through to TfL and Department of Transport for the funding. They would have considered that before allow us to have the funding to progress with the scheme. As we go through the consultation process and the outcome of those responses to the consultation and the report that will go to the traffic panel will also have an equality impact assessment on it. And also there is a large number of reports coming out around low traffic neighbourhoods, from people who are fully supportive of them to people who are totally against them, and a number of comments are made within it. But we will go by the consultation that we undertake, and that would be informed by professional officers who understand the legality around what we can do and not do around traffic schemes, and that would also be considered under the equality impact assessment.
Sorry, apologies, but I don't think that's answered my question really, because the equality impact assessment was not done thoroughly. When you actually look through it, there's barely any information there, and I'm just very interested because a big point has been made that there was a disability consultant that was advising the TARSAT committee, and I've seen no sort of documentation as to what that person actually said and what research they did. Is that if you could provide the public with an FOR, like some information regarding what specific advice the consultant gave to the TARSAT committee, that would be really appreciated.
I will ask officers to send you any equality impact assessment undertaken at this moment in time. It would have gone with the application. We're moving on to the question number 6, which is for Kinar Patel to Adam Swirsky. So Adam, did you want to deal with this question?
Yeah. So the question is about the Francis Road LTN and about the fire service in particular. And I'd say that the council's had regular liaison with the emergency services to ensure there's no impact on response times or access. Before the introduction of the scheme, the fire service clarified that Francis Road is not used as a direct route to get to other parts of the borough, and of course it remains accessible by crews from either end of the road.
And Kinar Patel, did you have a supplementary question? I saw your name on the list earlier on.
Yeah, so my supplementary question is in the reality, the currently emergency services can come through the Northwick Park and Gayton Road. What if there is any gasworks or any road blockage or any accident on the main road? Then it will delay the response time for the emergency services to come to the Francis Road, not on the other side of LTN, but on this side of LTN. Also, we have a nursery on our road as well.
Thanks, Kinar, and I completely understand your concern there, and that's why we keep in very, very regular contact with the fire service. And you know, from the conversations that we've had very recently, we have spoken to senior officers in the fire service. They've said that they don't believe there's any detrimental impacts on the service in that location from the LTN. So obviously, your points are well taken, and we'll continue to liaise very closely with the fire service. We wouldn't want there to be any issues whatsoever, but they're telling us at the moment that there's no concern about the Francis Road LTN.
Thank you. That now concludes the public questions. Before we move on to councillor questions, I notice, sorry for the delay in noticing, Richard Allman, Councillor Richard Allman, you have your hand up. I just wondered if it as a point you wish. Can't see you. I can't hear you. Maybe it's an accidental hand. I think that's what we get now, isn't it? So if we move on to the councillor questions, the first question is from...
It was simply to declare the interest, but you preempted me.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I've declared your non-pecuniary interest. So we now move on to councillor questions. It's quite a straightforward question, really, Marion. What importance do you place in public and councillor questions at these meetings? I think it's sort of, I think public and councillor questions are an important part of open and transparent democracy, which allows concerns to be raised and issues investigated when other routes may seem difficult or even have failed. But as you're aware, and it's important to note really, that public and councillor questions are not places where formal decisions on policy or service changes can be made. The legislation sets out how that can take place through formal structures. Marion, did you have a supplementary question?
Yes, and by the way, Leader, I'm delighted that you are getting over COVID, and I hope you go from strength to strength. I genuinely mean that. But I have to say, it's disappointing because even tonight, you're still not answering questions. And I think that goes for most of the cabinet that are asked questions. I mean, Karusha asked a question tonight, and actually the answer was very simple. She said, why is it that there are no LTNs, for example, in Stanmore? Well, there aren't any because the Conservative councillors made such a fuss and turned up at the traffic panel and lobbied to get them stopped, and they were stopped. I'm very, very grateful that they were stopped, by the way, and very, very pleased. Labour councillors in their own wards didn't do that, and they went ahead. That's the answer you should have given, but obviously you chose not to. At the last meeting, Keith Ferry did not answer my question correctly. I asked a very simple question about the regeneration programme. I won't revisit it now in the interest of brevity, but he completely missed the point and didn't answer my question. The trouble is, if people come along, members of the public particularly, never mind about us lot as councillors, and take the trouble to log on and ask you a question, any of you, you have to actually answer the question correctly. And you don't. And what it's doing is it's delegitimising the whole process. So wouldn't you agree that there might be a problem? And what are you going to do to improve it?
Well, I have to say it wasn't just Stanmore LTN that was withdrawn. A number of others were as well, after representations were made at the July traffic panel meeting, and the recommendations went through to Keith, who made a decision around the amounts of the comments that were made at that meeting, but also around representation that had been made by residents over the past few years. So we do answer the questions. It's just that sometimes people are asking us to change things when we're in the middle of a consultation period, which you know full well you can't just change things. So if you put a traffic order out after going to consultation, you can't just suddenly remove it without going through further consultation. And it's the same with some of the traffic schemes. The representation comes through, it goes through the Streets Place programme, the way we got it set up at the moment, and we if there's an issue that comes through, the traffic team will either make a recommendation to the cabinet member under their professional guidance, or what happened in December when the ambulance service raised a particular issue because they've got outdated equipment on their vehicles. That means they can't sort of navigate around, they haven't got the modern technology. But I would say how the council normally consults around some of these things. If you look at the schemes in Wealdstone that have been planned over the last 4 years, it went out to full consultation. See, this is where things should be done properly, you see. If we'd have been allowed to do it properly, we'd have gone out to full consultation, we'd have been having these discussions in a proper way, and then we could have amended the schemes so people have an overall consensus with. You never get full support for something, but you have consensus as a way forward. So we do listen to what happens at cabinet questions, but I must say they're not the only voices of people who are contacting the council. People contact councillors in a number of different ways, and it's not just through public and councillor questions. So thank you. We now move on to question number 2, which is Councillor China going to to Varsha, I think. Yes, it is. And
Yes. Thank you. So the question was, do you believe that the council has listened to residents at all times throughout the process of implementing LTN and other street space schemes? So as you know, Anjana, thank you for the question, the online portal has been open throughout the whole period since June for residents to make their comments, etc. And we have listened, and they can make their comments, and that the consultation is going to be opening next week. So that's a further opportunity for residents to put their views forward before any recommendation is put towards the TARSAT meeting later on. Do you have a supplemental, please?
Yes, I do. First of all, I want to say good to see you back, Graham, and I wish you a very, very speedy recovery. And I mean that. And thank God that you and Varsha will be answering the question and not Adam, because he will have gone round and round and round and answered the question in the same way. So thank you anyway. Yeah, you're right. And by the way, Graham, you mentioned that the emergency services did not have up-to-date equipment until December. That is not true. Emergency services actually told you in writing to the council in July that they should actually make that that this is not should be implemented.
So are you asking a supplemental, or are you just making a comment, Anjana?
No, I am asking a supplementary, but I'm correcting the leader, the councillor Graham Hanson, because it wasn't in December. You knew about it in July. The residents.
You asked the question because I'm not going to get into debates, because I know what the literature that has come through from the emergency services. So could you ask the supplementary question?
Yes, I will ask the supplementary question. And by the way, the answer you gave, the residents have a few consultations. They have already said to you many a times that they don't want this. So let's see anyway. The fact that you turned on some of these schemes and have now waived into a meaningful consultation shows you got at least part of the message from residents. By having your hand forced to hold a consultation on your street space schemes shows that these schemes are deeply polarizing and unpopular amongst Harrow residents. Why wouldn't you consider removing these schemes altogether until a meaningful consultation has taken place?
Okay, so and I've said this before, Anjana, and I'll repeat it again. So these schemes were put in, as you know, because of the emergency, and they're temporary measures, and we'd always said that there would be a review and a consultation. So we are following the process that we have said all along, and we are and residents have also had opportunity to put their views on the portal, which is also going to be put to towards the consultation information that will come through. So there's no U-turns, and I have also said every time that we will listen. We have engaged with the emergency services, and if need be, we would make changes if necessary, and we have done that. So it's not about U-turn. We are listening to the emergency services, and the portal has been open. We have followed the process that I have said all along that we would have a consultation. That moment has come now, so that every person can put their voice forward, not just a small group of people. Everyone should feel that they've been heard, and this is what you have been saying to me all along. Now I've done this, you're saying I've done the wrong thing. So whatever I did, no, Anjana, let me finish, because this is what you always say to me. I have done, and the consultation is going out. So we will wait and see what the residents want to say. We don't know yet, do we? So
yeah, but residents has already told you to remove this scheme and then do the consultation.
Set by your government.
It wasn't the government who asked you to do this. By the way, you're telling lies to people, and I think you should stop doing that, because not every council took the funding. You wanted to take the money, and that's why you've done it. Okay, so please stop telling lies to people.
Can I remind you that this meeting is being recorded and it will be assessed afterwards?
Yes, I'm sure. But
we now move on to a number of questions that have come through from.
Yeah, but leader, you should not be telling false stories to
about items on the agenda tonight, talking about finance. So, Pritesh, did you want to ask? Sorry, Adam, I think you're responding to all the questions from Pritesh. So it's on question number 3.
I'm just going to ask the question. I'm going straight in.
Are you just going to answer my questions, or shall I ask the question?
You want to ask it, Pritesh?
All right. Firstly, can I just extend my well wishes to you, leader, I hope you do get better and very soon. My question to Adam Swirsky, what is the total amount in government grants received by Harrow Council, both COVID and non-COVID related, during the financial year 2020-21?
Thanks, Councillor Patel. And if you look at the total grants which are reported in the Q3 revenue monitoring report, show that you've got 120, just shy of 121 million pounds of COVID-19 funding, and there's also in the overall 2021 budget 358 million pounds of non-COVID grants received. You'll note, obviously, those include an awful lot of money that's passported directly into specified provision.
Thank you very much. If I may ask you a supplementary, I very much appreciate that you've mentioned the 121 million received in COVID-related grants in the monitoring report. But, you know, you've received not only 22.61 in the form of emergency funding plus that 98 million, totaling 128. You've also received a lot of other grants, as you've just said, 358 million. Should these, is it not just right that you reflect some of these grants in the actual outturn reports that you present? For example, if I look at the revenue budget summary 2021-22 Appendix 3, the report mentions nothing of receiving these grants, yet you mention other grants, new home bonus grants, the council tax support grant or council multiply cap funding grant, all sorts. Why not this particular types of grants?
So Councillor Patel, Appendix 3, I think, is the reserves. I don't know if there was another appendix that you...
No, I'm referring to the actual revenue budget summary appendix, Appendix 3.
Revenue budget summary, yes, yeah. yes, absolutely.
You know,
well, I mean, look,
I'll let you answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the 358 million pounds I talked about, you know, that's made up of a whole variety of different grants, including, for example, our housing benefit rent allowance grant is 149 million pounds, and as you'll know, that will go directly into the hands of individuals who are in receipt of those benefits. So there's a tremendous you know, amount of money that is simply granted to the authority, but then of course we have to pass that immediately downwards into individuals without any discretion whatsoever. So what we typically focus on in our reports, Councillor Patel, is the money that we have some discretion over, because that's really the areas that you want to challenge us on. If you want to challenge us on the housing benefit payments, then, you know, that's really something to talk to members of Parliament about, because that's a national government function, which local authorities simply executing responsibility.
I think as a matter of sort of good practice, we should show every sort of revenue stream coming in, whether it's discretionary, non-discretionary, COVID-related grants, non-COVID related grants, and I hope that you will think about that and put that information down in the monitoring reports for the sake of transparency.
Richard, did you have question number 4? I think because it's related to report on tonight's agenda, if you want to just quickly read the question out.
Yeah, the second question is, which corporate property portfolio sites benefited from the planned preventative maintenance, and what is the total spent on building and maintenance responsive repairs for the financial year 2020-21?
Just Councillor, worth saying that on the, just on Appendix 3, I think the reason why there's some specific grants in Appendix 3 is because by law we need to demonstrate how we are funding the budget, and those are the grants that essentially are the fund the core discretionary spend, and so, you know, the rest again won't be isn't under our discretion, but that's the core amount of money that shows how we're actually funding the budget. But anyway, sorry, it's a technical point, but just thought I'd share that. In terms of planned preventative maintenance, that's, you know, related to periodic servicing and testing, everything from boiler servicing, lift servicing, fire alarms, all sorts of testing, and that's scheduled for all corporate buildings so that we meet our statutory requirements. For 2020-21, the total forecast spend on building maintenance and also responsive repairs for, you know, the corporate property portfolio is around £1.4 million, and that does include both the planned preventative maintenance and the responsive repairs.
Thank you, Councillor Swirsky. If I may ask a supplementary on that, I note from the report that the building sort of maintenance and responsive repairs on corporate sites has been overspent by 300k. Now, I wanted to understand what corporate sites does this maintenance being done on?
You know, I'm happy to give you a very more detailed response outside the meeting. Obviously, we have a huge number of assets across the borough, and you know, the sort of maintenance and responsive repairs will happen in all of our corporate sites, because everything from, you know, repairing lift handles, door handles, for example, windows and so on. So, you know, it's absolutely routine spend. But obviously, you know, we do need to, some of this is absolutely health and safety matters, and we do need to make sure that we fund it.
Of course, I totally appreciate that. My reason for the question was because obviously we're moving out of the civic centre, and we've got a majority of the staff now working from home. And if much of that budget is being spent on the civic centre, which now resides empty, then perhaps we should think about minimising that expenditure as much as possible.
I think just on that, I mean, it's a very, very fair point, and absolutely top priority. We have, you know, we have made provision or plans in the civic centre to adjust our use of the building at a time when there are very few people in it, to make sure that we absolutely minimise the spend on that building. I mean, you'll be. I can completely reassure you that we're spending not a penny more than we need to on a building that ultimately is not going to last a huge amount of time longer.
Thank you, Councillor. My final question, what financial commitments have been made in the capital programme for the introduction of electric vehicle charging infrastructure across Harrow?
So if I look at the electric charging infrastructure we've put in so far, there's about 10 points in the town centre. We're currently installing around 30 charging points in street lighting columns in residential streets, which we're based on demand surveys. And these are being funded through the Department of Transport, which has an office for low emission vehicles. We've got a budget in our local implementation programme of the transport budget for taking forward those points. It's a small budget, about £50,000 a year. But of course, most of the funding that we anticipate spending on electric vehicle charging points will come from national grants, and we'll be bidding actively into those. And we believe there will be further opportunities to bid, hopefully very soon, into Department of Transport funds.
Thank you, Councillor Seversky. If I may.
Oh, I think you're on mute.
Your microphone's gone off, British. We've gone over the 15 minutes, but if we're quick, I think we can get.
Sorry, very quickly. The reason why I asked that question is obviously a report was released just last week by the Department of Transport on the number of charging points installed across London. Now, Harrow has got the lowest number of charging points out of all 33 London boroughs, including all outer London boroughs, with only 16 charging points. Even the surrounding boroughs around Harrow have higher numbers. Barnet, for example, 139, Brent, 233, Ealing, 247, Hillingdon, 202. Now, it is very likely that ownership and use of electric vehicles will increase as time progresses, especially as diesel and petrol vehicles are being phased out by 2030, as you know. In the absence of uptake for any other modes of transport, I think it is imperative that Harrow invests in electric charging infrastructure. We are falling behind, and it risks falling behind even further. I hope you take a serious look into this shortfall and address that problem. Being last on the list is not a good thing to have, and I hope that you will give it very close consideration.
I mean, Councillor Patel, what I'd say on that is that I very much value being challenged on climate change initiatives, because we across both parties need to push harder and faster on that. So I take the point. I think it's a very valid point. We have put, I want to assure you, £500,000 into our capital programme for climate change. Primarily that's around solar and energy improvements on our own estate, where we think we can get the best bang for our buck from our own funds. But we need to aggressively seek funding from those grants, and if necessary from our own funds, to drive up electrical vehicle charging infrastructure as part of a wider climate change strategy. And as you'll know, we are one of the London boroughs that leads one of the key London work streams on climate change, and we want to be in the forefront, not catching up on across all of these dimensions. So thank you for that.
Well, we're not on the forefront in terms of electric charging points, so hope you take that on board.
There's other riders on that. the other two questions are both coming to me, and if we can be brief, I think we can get through them very quickly. This one's from Councillor John Hinckley, similar to the question asked in December around the Headstone Horticultural Society waiting for progressive communications as promised. I think this is a very similar question. In response to the question, this is a very similar question to that asked earlier by Bargu Dimlik. And as you will note from that answer, a lot hinges on the response from the GP and the CCG on the possibility of a surgery continuing at their sites, which has been delayed because of the pandemic. I have spoken with the officer concerned, and she has undertaken to get in touch with the group this week and progress this matter with the society. John, did you have a supplementary question?
Yes, thank you very much, Leader. And it's very good to see you back. And I am really so sorry to keep on asking questions about the Headstone Horticultural Society. It's only because you don't actually give the answers. So my supplementary is, can you please explain why on Tuesday the 9th, i.e. this Tuesday, the head of corporate estates told the Headstone Horticultural Society that she had no information. But the day before, Monday, we received, or the Headstone Horticultural Society received, an email from the surgery saying that they had had an extension to their lease. Given the very poor way the administration have handled this matter, will you please direct the corporate estates to give Headstone Horticultural Society a 1-year extension to their lease, pending a final resolution to their request to remain permanently on that site? Thank you.
Thank you, John. As you will recall, when you asked the question in December, we then went into quite a serious pandemic where quite a few people, I think there was over 2,500–3,000 people a week were testing positive for COVID, and our hospitals were being inundated, so staff were relocated. So all council services have been delayed. But also what's been delayed is the decision of what the CCG and the GP surgery wants to do, which is probably why the officer have said they got no further information at this time. It is resultant on whether they put a proper business case forward through the CCG, that's their part of it for the NHS, of whether they can or that are going to keep a GP surgery there or not. I raised with the officers, or I think some of them are on the call tonight, and they'll take note, but whether we can have a look at the option of extending the lease or not. But it's not, as I said earlier, we can't make policy decisions at cabinet questions. It has to be investigated by the officer and we'll get a due response back. So thank you, John. And the final question comes from Councillor Richard Almond, and Richard's always very quick.
What evidence do you have that closing places of worship has helped to stop the spread of COVID?
Thank you, Richard. I think Councillor Ferry, in my absence at the last meeting, broadly covered this. None of us wants to see places of faith closed, but these are and were very challenging times. In January, just 5 weeks ago, Harrow was struggling to contain some of the highest rates of COVID-19 in Britain, increasing 33% every 5 days. And we hit, as from the presentation earlier, from Sean's, which was highlighted in Sean's presentation, that we were close to nearly 1,000 per 100,000, which is one of the highest in the country. Overall, the application of the lockdown in Harrow is obviously having an impact on the reduction in number of cases. And although the government guidance set out the places of worship can open to congregational prayer, in Harrow many decided to close, do their bit to break the chain of infection and stop the spread. In terms of evidence, all the data available clearly shows that restrictions are the most effective way of reducing the infections. The nature of the virus means that it is difficult to pin any specific intervention on having an impact. However, in a lockdown, asking people to stay at home and limit the time they go out will have a major impact. And as we have seen from the number of cases and the number of hospital admissions locally, the lockdown has and is having an impact. Everyone has done their bit in Harrow, and I'm very proud of our joint endeavours to break the chain of infection and save lives. We couldn't have done it on their own. We needed that community spirit, and I'm pleased that they all came together to do so. So, Richard, do you have a quick supplementary question?
Yes, the simple answer to my question then would have been the word none. My supplementary is based on your email dated the 5th of February, at the end of last week, when you said, "I want to thank the community leaders who have followed our advice and helped stop the spread of COVID by closing their meeting places and places of worship." Public advice relating to COVID is meant to be evidence-based. Sending out an email trying to embarrass or cajole people into not doing what they're legally entitled to do and which the government has said was safe, and moreover by implying that by attending their places of worship they're doing less than their civic duty, or as you said a minute ago, doing their bit. It's not what I'd expect of a council leader. Saying something like that and coming back to the subject which you broached at the beginning of the current lockdown, which is what I asked Councillor Ferry about at the last cabinet meeting, it was a different question, sounds less like giving reasoned advice or making reasoned comment than the expression of either prejudice or ignorance. Will you therefore from now on, when making comment or giving advice on matters relating specifically to public health and control of COVID, stick to what is supported by the evidence that you've got?
I can support a lot of what I've said by evidence. From throughout the first lockdown, when more stringent restrictions were in place, the virus was controlled in a quicker pace of time than this time. I do know that at the end of November, that when the variant was first identified, which was recognised by Mr. Hancock making his statement on the 14th of December, that the virus was now out of control in the UK, which was why he was heading to more stricter controls across the country. I do know that I was on a call with Public Health England for London when first time I ever seen Professor Fenton, who's the Chief Officer for Public Health England for London, very nervous about the escalation of COVID in London. And that is why we went into Tier 4 and in further lockdowns from the following Saturday. I do know that over Christmas, as I mentioned earlier, that the rates were escalating exponentially, and it is that argument we used with the Minister for Education as why schools should remain closed rather than opening up. And it was the reducing down, and this is where the faith leaders agreed, that reducing down the level of contact amongst the population is the only way that reduces the spread of the virus. So all of this is evidence-based. It's all available online on the government website, and it's all of it is not subjective. It's all of it is factual information that shows what happened. And I can say that Harrow was below 1,000 per 100,000. If you look at places like Havering and Redbridge and Barking and Dagenham, where the churches, places of worship were open slightly longer, the rates didn't come down till after that time. So it is evidence-based. What you've got to make clear is there's no single thing that can slow this virus, and it's a multitude of things, and one of those was reducing contact between people, which is the most effective. So thank you very much. That does conclude the Cabinet questions. We now move on to item number 6, which is the key decision schedule. It's published as February to April 21. Can you note the report on that Harrow Digital Infrastructure Strategy has been withdrawn from the agenda for this meeting, and the report on procurement of Harrow Council's domestic abuse service has been deferred to the May 2021 Cabinet meeting. So with those amendments, can you note the key decisions schedule, please?
Noted.
Thank you. We now move on to item 7, which is on page 19 to 20, which is the progress on scrutiny projects. Can you note the updates on those 2 pages, please? Noted. Nodding. We now move on to item 9, which is the Housing Revenue Account Budget 2021-22 and the Medium Term Financial Strategy 22-23 right through to 23-24. They're on pages 21 to 50. Before I invite Phil and Adam to come in, can Cabinet please note that approval of the HRA account and the MTFS reserved to Council on the 25th of February, but there is no specific recommendation on that within the body of the report. So just noting that the recommendation will be that it's Cabinet makes a recommendation to Council on the 25th. So, Phil, did you want to introduce the report?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, this is a very similar report that I reported to previous Cabinet, the draft one. So the outline figures are, we're proposing within the government guidelines to have a rent increase of CPI plus 1%, and also the increased borrowing and expenditure on our capital programme as they've and also other charges or the standstill of charges within that, particularly around utility costs. One of the main challenges around the HRA this year, as everybody would appreciate, is the economic impact of COVID. We're already seeing that there is a significant increase in tenants' rent arrears. Obviously, the team are working with those tenants in helping them to get proper advice about how to reduce their arrears, how they can manage those arrears, and how they can manage the challenges around less income. The more important, or as I pointed out last time, is more importantly that the overall capital programme will be, if agreed, will continue to supply Harrow residents with affordable homes, council homes. This programme has already delivered 95 properties, and now, as I explained last Cabinet, there's plans to have more, particularly around the regeneration at Grange Farm, which is continuing with only a slight delay. There are other projects on the ground over in Chichester Court in Stanmore, that is continuing, and others are being planned. So that's an important thing. The other side, or the other part of the capital programme, is the continuation of the very important work for safety following the Grenfell tragedy. We will continue to deliver Home Safe 3 and also upgrading the fire doors. Another innovation this year is the start of our climate changes embedded in that report, and there will be a future report to Cabinet about installing heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, to replace gas boilers in our sheltered accommodation. So we are starting our journey. As I reported last Cabinet, we were successful in a Pan West London bid on starting our journey on retrofitting private properties. We're now starting our journey on working on climate change in council properties. As Councillor Henson said, this matter will be taken to full council for approval, and I beg that council do agree this to go forward to full council. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Adam, did you want to add anything more to the report?
I only echo the point that I think it's fantastic that we're able to continue to invest in council homes, and we have such an ambitious plan to continue to build council homes across the borough.
Thank you. Does anyone have any comments on the report? I can't see any hands up. So the recommendation is that Cabinet recommends to Council on 25th. Is that all agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. We now move to item 10, which is the Commission of Harrow Paediatric Services, which is on page 51 to 60. Christine, would you like to introduce the report?
Thank you, Leader. This report is about our proposal with regard to the commissioning of paediatric services for children in Harrow, and we are requesting that Cabinet delegates authority as listed in the report and approve the establishment of an overarching Section 75 agreement with the CCG to commission speech and language therapy services and occupational therapy services for children. And also that Cabinet approve the financial contribution by the local authority to the CCG. You'll know we've got a really good, strong working partnership with the CCG. with tremendous respect and understanding on both sides. And we already have an overarching Section 75 agreement with the CCG, a small one, to commission our local mental health services, support services in school for children. And we're also requesting within this report that authority is delegated, again, as listed, to extend this existing agreement for the mental health services for children when it comes up for renewal next year. The financial contribution to the CCG is coming from the designated school grant, from what's known as the high needs block allocation. Now, you know, I mean, I never stop telling you, but you shouldn't be able to forget that actually funding for children with special educational needs and disabilities in education is appalling across the nation. All services that try to provide good services for children are inadequately funded, and this isn't really being addressed at all. So we're not alone in this, but it is a serious pressure upon budgets. However, this is a statutory requirement that we do this, and not only is it a statutory requirement, but we want to do it. Because it's for the benefit of children. We also want to make a direct award of the contract to CNWL, which is Central and Northwest London, and I think they're still called a foundation trust, which already provide for us an excellent 0 to 19 service and an excellent looked after children's health team. And we would believe it will be in the best interest of children. It will be a great benefit if CNWL provides this new service and then is able to link very comprehensively with the services they already provide. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Christine. Was there any questions on the report or any comments? No, I just comment. I think it's a very good actually proposal when you read the report. There's some really good pieces of work in there, and that joint work across the health service I think is always beneficial, and it builds on the work we've already done across some of the integrated work. So it's really good. So the recommendations are actually on page 52. Are they agreed? Yeah, everyone's agreed. Thank you. We now move on to item 11, which is the
I think Graham, I think Sue wanted to just say something.
Yeah.
Oh, Sue.
I need to declare an interest. I'm a member of CNWL.
Okay, then, yeah, that would be noted in the minutes.
Yes, it's a non-pecuniary interest, and my son receives services.
Yeah, that's.
Okay. Thank you, Sue. So that moves this item onto item 11. Which is the final capital programme for 21-22 right through to 23-24, which is on pages 61 to 80. Adam, did you want to introduce the report?
Thank you, Councillor Henson, and I will be quite brief on these financial items because we have a full council meeting in a couple of weeks where there'll be lots of opportunity to debate these items, and I'm sure other councillors will also want the chance to weigh in on them. Councillor Osborne already has his hand up. I haven't said anything yet. Well, but if we look at the capital programme just in brief, it's very similar to what we proposed in draft in December. There is net reduction in the capital programme of 117 million that's been removed or reduced. And clearly quite a lot of that is related to commercial investment in property that we will not be going ahead with. I do think it's worth pointing out overall that there are some really important small but high impact investments that have been included. We know that we're investing in a whole range of community projects, and I think Town Centre Library is one to always call out and is looking great. And you know, as soon as we come out of COVID, I think we'll have great access to that. There's also investments in playground equipment that's been implemented, as I mentioned, climate change, and a whole series of high street investments, including a really big investment in Wealdstone, which will be externally funded if all goes well, which is really exciting. So a really strong programme that I commend to the Cabinet.
Thank you, Adam. Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be brief because obviously we have the opportunity to debate this at full council in a couple of weeks. But I just had a couple of questions, if that's okay to Adam. Firstly, we're about to go and consult on the LTNs with quite a significant change potentially in those schemes. I wondered what provision was made in this capital budget if the consultation decides that those changes should go ahead.
Thanks, Councillor Osborne. And although there is a cost implication, it is very manageable within the existing capital programme. I believe it will come out of the parking team capital programme. And obviously that's something that we will consider as part of the consultation response and as part of the ultimate TASAP decision on the LTNs. But we've made sure that the schemes that we propose are absolutely affordable within the current programme.
I mean, to be clear, when I spoke to officers this afternoon, they didn't know what the cost would be of any of these changes. They didn't know what the revenue cost was or what the capital cost was. And I just think when you do the consultation, it might be helpful to set out to the residents how much any proposed change might cost. My other question, and it's much more of a technical question, there's two reports that talk about the capital financing costs to the council. There's this, obviously, and there's also the Treasury Management strategy statement. On table 1 of this capital budget, capital programme, you set out the costs, and it says that we go from 18% in 2021 to 25% of the budget being a capital finance cost in 22-23. But in the Treasury Management report, you state that we go from 18% in 2021 to 21% in 22-23 and 22% in 23-24. And that actually is an £8 million difference. So we're talking about quite significant annual capital financing cost difference. And I wondered which was the accurate figure.
And if I'm honest with you, Councillor Osborne, I found this table challenging to interpret. I don't think it's totally intuitive as to the percentage. And I don't think that we should take from this that there is some enormous more greater part of the budget that's being eaten up by capital financing. So I'm very happy to come back to you because I think that there's quite a technical response to that question, which isn't as obvious as the table would suggest. But I'm very happy to come back to you. I know that you quite rightly ask questions about are we managing our capital investments wisely, and are we sure that we can pay them back? And I'll say more about that in the Treasury Management, but I think that's clearly been top of mind for many years with the capital programme as well. I just wanted to also come back on your previous point, because you said it's always helpful to know the cost of what we're proposing. I'm not sure the impression you got from officers, but I think there is a relatively clear view that's been formed about the approximate cost of the initiatives. I would say that we go out to consult on many initiatives, including many highways changes all the time, and we don't, as a matter of routine, share detailed costings. All of those have some cost implications, but we don't usually share itemized costings on the schemes that we consult with, as long as they're within our budget.
This doesn't seem to be in the budget. Just to be clear though, on these two tables, they're two tables showing exactly the same thing with £8 million difference in the figures. It's a quite substantial difference, and they're both showing the position as a percentage of the 2021 net budget, and they show two very different both figures in terms of cash and also percentages, and one of them has to be wrong. And I'm just curious which one. They're both coming to the same meeting, they're purporting to show the same thing, and yet they are noticeably different.
And Councillor Osborne, if I'm looking at the same table, the one does talk about net budget, the other talks about net revenue stream. And I just say that it sounds pedantic, but this is the kind of thing which on a technical basis does lead to differences in the way these percentages are reported. I'm afraid it's not a satisfying answer because it is technical. But
the is exactly the same. Capital financing costs as a percentage of 2021 net budget is exactly the same on both reports. I mean, it literally is word for word the same. Because I think it might be something like that, but it just clearly isn't.
Look, the one says, look, we can debate the wording. The one says the general fund, the other ones, there could be the HRA as well. Really happy to come back to you. It is unfortunate. It is not, there are some really technical differences here, which unfortunately means
it's only £8 million.
So the question's been noted, but if necessary, an explanation be given when it's published for the full council meeting. If it needs that, it might just need an interpretation. Dawn could send an email through, or the management team can. So the recommendations are on page. someone to remind me now, on page 61, recommended to council. Can we agree to recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed.
We now move on to item 12, which is the final revenue budget. I know we're going to speak a lot about this at the full council meeting, but Adam, did you want to introduce the report?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Henson. So, as I say, we'll say much more about this. I just think I'd note that since the draft budget, the big shift has been that we've been able to, you'll remember in the draft budget that we put significant amount of reserves against the budget gap that was left. I think it's really impressive from our finance team's perspective. They've managed to now get that back down so that there's almost no use of reserves whatsoever to set our budget, and the reserves that are being used are absolutely expressly for the purpose. We're built up for the purpose of helping us to set that budget. It does require a difficult decision on council tax. It's been imposed nationally on us, and that's extremely unfortunate for our families paying the price of the government's indecision on that and lack of action on that. But we are taking action locally to protect those on the lowest incomes who are claiming council tax support, and because of that action, those claimants will not see an increase in their payments. The budget does also make some really important investments in things like equalities and ensuring that we can pay the London living wage and make good on our promises that we committed to as a council in November. And you'll note as well, of course, that does leave very big budget gaps in future years. I personally believe that's more a function of the terrible uncertainty that's been left from a national basis for all councils, which is putting a lot of councils in peril. But obviously, as the year progresses, we'll be coming back to Cabinet regularly to report on how that's going, what we're hearing from central government in terms of future funding, what we're seeing in terms of our own position, and making sure that we are able to set a balanced budget for the years to come.
Thank you, Adam. Paul, is that a new hand or a very old hand?
No, it's a new one. Again, just to respond a little bit to your point, though, again, we'll probably go through this in somewhat more detail and probably as repetitive as well, I suspect. I mean, just to be clear, blaming everything on the government is all well and good, but as we know, they've given a considerable amount of money to the council. It's also worth noting that the Labour administration, Harrow, has always put the council tax up by the maximum it could every single year I can remember being on the council, whether it was a Labour government or a Conservative government nationally. The only administration that's ever frozen the council tax was a Conservative administration. But I wanted to ask a specific question, which is around the climate change emergency. What provision is there in this revenue budget to continue the work that we started using the contingencies this year? In particular, there's members of staff who are paid for this year out of the contingencies. Are we planning to stop that work next year, or is there something in the budget that I can see to enable that to continue?
So on the council tax point, I just taking a look, if my computer will let me, at a headline from the Daily Express, which, as we know, is a socialist newspaper of the most Marxist kind, from the 26th of November 2020, where the headline is Rishi Sunak sets to increase council tax by 5%, how Britons will be affected. So I think it's universally understood that council tax has effectively become a national tax, and I'm afraid the Conservatives haven't been in power in Harrow in some time, and certainly not since that was the case. So whatever the council response says, unfortunately, council tax is being imposed effectively with national government these days. In terms of climate change, I'm really proud that we've got £500,000 capital in the budget to continue our investments in climate change. As I mentioned, we are one of the leaders across London of one of the Pan-London climate change work streams, and our team, including Matthew Adams, has done a brilliant job of both pushing forward a really coherent strategy, which is enabling us to be really clear about where we get the biggest bang for our buck, but also done some brilliant work engaging residents and stakeholders, community groups in Harrow, so that we're really bringing people along with us on that journey, and that work will absolutely continue.
But it's not in the revenue budget. How's it going to be funded?
Well, as I say, there is absolutely budget provision for that work, and in fact, we put the additional £500,000 in the capital programme this year as well.
But that's not revenue.
I mean, Paul, the budget provision is there. We're happy to provide the detail with you.
I'm sure you're asked against, Paul. I'd just like to comment. We can comment on the 25th of February. I do think there's a number of statements being made here, because I remember in March last year when Mr. Jenrick said that all our costs would be reimbursed, and that hasn't completely happened. You know, it was still an argument. It's not just from Labour councils, that's right across the Local Government Association of all councils in the UK have said that 97% have returned that they haven't been fully reimbursed for the expenditure during COVID. And on the council tax points you made, Paul, saying we put it up every year, I know that since 2015 the government has consistently reduced our revenue support grant from £52 million down to £1.6 million. But what I would like to say is I'd just like to say tonight, because I see Dawn's here, Dawn and her team who have actually put this budget together in the way they have and gone through it with Adam and the team to make sure that it is presentable at this stage. And I say it's presentable at this stage is because of the late announcements that came out around funding, and we've got another funding statement being made on the 2nd of March. So it's all that lateness that has come through, and also the uncertainty over the next 12 months is going to cause a lot of hardship for our small compact finance team. But I think they've done a really remarkable job to get us where we are, not just to keep control of the finances during COVID, so we understood what they were, but also assessing against the existing budget. So we'll pass our thanks on to Dawn as well.
Here.
Oh, seriously. So the recommendations are in the report on page 3 of the supplementary agenda. Are they agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We now go through some very complex reports. The Revenue and Capital Monitoring Report, which is at Q3. Adam.
Thank you, Councillor Henson. So obviously this, has been a fast-moving picture in terms of our revenue capital position, where we've kept it under very tight control. Again, big thank you to Dawn and Sharon and the rest of the finance team as well on that, as well as all the directorates who've done a great job of keeping their costs under control while also delivering on all our COVID promises. And what you'll see is that we are now forecasting an underspend on the revenue budget of around £2 million. That's in line with what you'll see in the revenue budget, where we've partly covering next year's costs by attaining a £2 million underspend this year. So that's absolutely brilliant, and again means that we're not dipping into reserves next year. And you'll also note that we revised our capital programme forecast in December, and with that revised forecast, we are now forecast to spend 96% of that. So that revision was well timed.
Thank you, Adam. Paul, I see your hand gone up straight away.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, it does stretch credibility to believe that the council was not compensated by the government for the effect of COVID when it's projecting a net underspend of £2 million. I mean, the reality is the government has gone above and beyond what it said it would do, has delivered hundreds of millions of pounds in grants to the council, has provided money to businesses in Harrow, and I think that should be recognised.
Well, I think, Councillor Osborne, we've all said that we really value, some of the initiatives that have come forward. I think there's still left huge numbers of people and huge numbers of businesses out, and I'm sure you get emails just like we do, people who are simply not eligible for the government schemes, whether it's certain groups of self-employed people, certain businesses that have absolutely suffered through the pandemic, and people are still, this is a time of enormous hardship, and so it is right that the government's put some money in to support, but that this is a time of national emergency, and the government is still threatening 6 million people on the lowest incomes in this country with a £1,000 pay cut to their incomes from April, and that's just weeks away. And if you have to live with that level of uncertainty, I'm not sure you'd be thanking the government at all. Never mind the fact that many councils across the country are still teetering on the edge, and no one has any certainty about how councils are going to be funded next year. So I appreciate what the government's done, but I'm afraid I'd certainly give it a C at best.
Thank you, Adam. Is there any other questions? I don't see any other hands come up. The recommendation is on. Sorry. The recommendation's on page 3 of the second supplementary agenda. That's why I got confused. Sorry, no, it's on the report, page 81. Are they agreed?
Agreed.
We now move to the second supplementary report, which is the Treasury Management Strategy Statement, including an investment strategy. Adam.
Normally, I'd like to make some, gently jovial comment about this report, but given the what we've seen from the Handworth Parish Council, I think it's best to keep these discussions very much on track and on point. And actually, if you do get into the detail of these reports, they're pretty interesting. I think, Graham, you'd agree that there's lots of interesting points there about the impact of potential negative interest rates, what's happening in the money markets, and you can see the comprehensive way in which we approach the management of our debt and also our deposits. And I think one of the key things that struck me is that if you look at our borrowing, clearly we do have significant debts, but 84% of it is in debt that's got a 10-year maturity or longer. And actually, the average maturity of our debt is 37 years. And as I mentioned in January, and when we previously brought a Treasury Management report to Cabinet, we've done extremely well at borrowing significant amounts of very low interest rates, which is actually driving quite a bit of capital financing saving for us as a council. So yes, not a report that's an easy read, but actually a huge thanks again to our Treasury Management team, Dawn Sharon and others who have done a brilliant job in the background to make sure that we've got the money to pay for all the services that people rely on.
Thank you, Adam. I see Paul put his hand up before you started this time.
Yeah, I'm actually one of the few people I think who's read this report, certainly in any detail. Hence the question on the table in Appendix G. But I'd just like to reiterate the comment I made, I think, at the last Cabinet or the one before, because I have had discussions with Dawn, but I don't really think it's got anywhere. To me, there is still an issue about how we report the investment performance when we've invested in property. I understand the point about it not materially affecting revenue budget in the short term, or even the capital repayment or anything like that, but just to understand the value of that asset set against the money we borrowed to pay for it, I think would be important to report. And I know we've taken the money out to do more of that, but if we ever do more of that in the future, I think having that reporting is really important. I mean, this report goes into a large amount of detail as to how all our other bits of money and bits of debt are structured. I just think this is a missing piece of that. And I just really ask you if you can find a way of getting that to be reflected in these reports. Thank you.
I know, Councillor Osborne, last time you asked a question about Treasury Management report, you were complimented on what an excellent question it was. And if you're fishing for those compliments again, I'm more than happy to offer them. I mean, I think it's a fair challenge. I think, to be honest, we do monitor those commercial investments very closely, particularly the rents that come from them. And that's in the end what hits our bottom line and what really makes a difference to our ability to fund the budget. But take the point, and we can have another look.
But you set out in the risk side of it that you're looking at security of the capital and also the big liquidity of it. Clearly, if you can't sell the property because it's gone down significantly in value, that affects the liquidity. I'm not doubting that officers measure it internally. My concern is it's not reflected in any report that's available to the opposition, and therefore we can't see what's going on, or the public for that matter.
Well, and as you know, scrutiny can request any information that we have. So it may well be something that scrutiny wants to have a look at in more detail. I'm obviously very happy to go down that route if that's of interest. But I
think we should have it reported in this.
Your point's well made, Paul, and it's been noted. There's people there, and Adams has responded and probably look at that of how it could be done or whether it can be done. Is there any other questions that anyone has on this report? No. So the recommendations, as I said, are on the supplementary report on page 3. Are they agreed?
Agreed.
Excellent. That brings us to any other urgent business. We haven't been notified any, so I'd like to thank you all for. Oh, sorry, Phil, you have your hand up.
Yes, Chairman. Well, it's not urgent business, but as this is the last Cabinet before one of our heads of services leaves the service of Harrow Council, I'm referring to Nick Powell. I would just like to make it a public record and hopefully the Cabinet will support me on thanking Paul for all his hard work, Nick Powell, and how he's led the regeneration or the building of council homes and the stability of the HRA going forward. Thank you for your time.
Well said. Well said, Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Phil.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Your comments and the comments are agreed, and Paul will pass them on to Nick. Is there any other is there any other business? I can't see any hands, so thank you for your. Sean, you put your hand up before you saying goodbye.
Muted.
His microphone off.
Sorry, I'm just waiting goodbye to people, Graham. Sorry, I didn't want to escape to carry on. Sorry, apologies.
Yeah, thank you for your time this evening, and we'll see you all very soon. Thank you very much.
Yep, thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye all.